Are you wanting to have cleaner, crisper, sharper looking lines in your drawings? Clean lines help us to see things easily, help to keep things separate, allow the white space to work as much in our drawing, in our scene, as any ink marks do, and can be particularly effective in fairly minimally drawn subjects. So here are 7 ways to help us draw with nice clean lines. But the first of these is, well, what's a not very clean line? What's dirty line work looking like? And there are 2 main types, I think, of lines that we can't really describe as clean. So a clean line looks something like this. But there are 2 common problematic ways of drawing lines. The first is drawn and looks something like this, and it's known as feathering. And it's drawn with a series of relatively short lines layered over the top of each other and overlapping in the way that feathers overlap. The other way of drawing lines that ends up pulling away from this nice clean look is sort of like what I think of as a roughing out approach, where we draw half a dozen lines and then we refine that in. This can particularly work with circles, where the parts of the curve that aren't in the right place stand out and help us refine where the right place for the curved line can be. So we end up in the roughing out approach with a lot of excess lines that may or may not be even close to the right spot, with a heavier series of lines that define the actual shape we're wanting. Now, I've exaggerated these slightly, of course, but if you think your line work sometimes starts to go in either of these directions, then these tips can help you. So if knowing what we're trying to avoid is the first step, having some understanding of where these come from is, I think, also very helpful in moving away from them. And generally, these sorts of lines indicate a lack of confidence. I'm not sure that I can actually draw the line I want. So in this case, in the feathering case, I'm doing lots of little lines because I feel like I can have more control over a small line. And because feathering creates a thicker looking line, perhaps I can hide some errors in that thickness. Or I'm not really sure of the shape I'm trying to create, and I don't know whether that's quite right. If I want a square, I can see that that's not quite right, so maybe I can bring it in and push it out. Is that kind of right? And when I get a feeling that I've maybe hit the jackpot, I strengthen those now so the right outline stands out from the scaffolding lines that I've put down first. So the second tip is, if we can be understanding why we might be producing lines in these ways, we can work at not feeling so urgent to get things down. And we can start to get experience in taking the risk of drawing the lines we would like by drawing them in a different way. It may feel a bit scary when we start to try drawing cleaner lines that come from a place of more control and more confidence. The third tip is that so often we end up being hesitant because we actually haven't seriously, clearly worked out in our mind what we're trying to do. We haven't observed our reference carefully enough to know exactly what sort of proportions we have. Am I wanting to draw a square? Am I wanting to draw a rectangle? Where exactly am I positioning the features? What exactly is the angle? The problem can be that we've started to put ink on the paper while we're still looking and still working out exactly what it is we're trying to draw. If I draw with pencil, obviously I can erase any lines, but even with pencil, our aim should be to have the most accurate, clean lines we can have first go. So it can be helpful before we draw something, to do some practice mark making, to get used to whatever combination of marks, the gaps between them, the angles that we want to draw them at. Some drawing dress rehearsal. This can help us to have not just confidence, but to actually work out how far we can draw a line in one go and maintain control. It's very hard to control what we're doing if we haven't planned what we're trying to do. The fourth tip is, before I actually put the ink on the paper, to look at my paper and to either look at what I've drawn already or what I'm hoping to draw in the space that I have, and to try and visualize exactly where my mark's going. So I'm trying to make sure that when I do put ink on the paper, it has the best chance of being in the right place and for the right length. Sometimes the order in which we place marks on the paper can give us greater accuracy, makes it easier for us to line things up. So I'm visualizing where I want the line to start and to end, and then I'm planning. A little tip that's not one of the 7, but when I'm drawing a line that needs to end at a certain point, I need to concentrate my focus on where the line's going to stop, not on the end of my pen. I bring my arm intuitively to the point where it needs to stop. The 5th point is to practice doing nice, clean lines under certain controlled situations. Normally, I'm a believer in the best drawing practice is spent actually doing drawings, that doing mark making in isolation really doesn't teach us a great deal overall. However, if our problem is a lack of confidence in putting lines and marks on the paper, it can be helpful just to get used to feeling what it feels like in my arm, in my head with the pen, to start to not draw lines such as this, but to start to draw lines that have more length. And if you hold your fingers right down near the end of the pen, I really suggest moving further back. Besides the fact we get a better view of what we're doing, it allows nice sweeping straight marks with a nice smooth, even speed. We lock our fingers so that we hold the pen rigidly in place, and then we move from the arm. And so we practice drawing nice smooth lines. And these can include curves as well. And if you want to practice circles, I suggest using a square so that you only need tackle it one quadrant at a time. What we're trying to do is give ourselves a new experience, a new memory, as well as a new style of drawing lines, of putting marks on the paper, and a feeling that we have control over our lines. While we're practicing, it's also good to find out how far can I go with nice smooth lines? At what point and at what speed do I lose control? Because that's really important information to have, because often a drawing will require us to go beyond what we can comfortably do in a nice, smooth, even movement. And the 6th point is to remember that when we have a long straight line that we need to do, that we can do a series of lines and join them. However, what we don't want to do is to have lines that are unnecessarily short and that overlap in a feathering look. What I suggest is go as far as we can in sections. Now you'll notice that each of my lines, to there, was not particularly long. What was useful was my ability to join them into a longer straight line. And if you notice how I did it by actually leaving a gap. leaving the smallest gap I can. What this lets me do is that it lets me line up the join carefully. I can come close, but I don't let the pen touch the paper until I'm about to start drawing. Now, this takes a little bit of practice, but it's an ideal skill to just practice in this sort of isolated way without having the overhead, the time, the stress of doing a drawing. And then when I have a line that's a bit longer than what I feel I can confidently draw, I'm not tempted to go back to kind of roughing it out or to start doing lots of small feathery marks. Instead, I can join a series of marks that I can comfortably and accurately and cleanly draw with a slight gap that, in the context of a finished drawing, no one's going to notice. And while I explain the 7th tip, I'll let you see my line drawing of this one of the 3 examples that I showed at the start. And the 7th tip is to do our line practice, our clean line drawing practice with pen, not with pencil. Even if we normally draw with pencil, because it's easier to fudge a line with a pencil. Now, that ability makes graphite a great drawing implement. Its versatility according to the angle we hold it at to the paper, according to the sharpness of the point, according to how heavily we press down on it. And of course, we can even deliberately feather our lines to create a certain textured effect. All of these things make it fantastic to draw with and a means of doing really effective drawings. But when I'm trying to learn to draw with cleaner lines, with crisper lines, then we want to practice in the way that's going to maximize our improvement in the minimum amount of time. I don't mean taking a shortcut, I mean working smarter in the most efficient way possible. And using a pen forces us to have a greater discipline of control in what we do. And it will also tackle those fears, the nervousness, the lack of confidence that may well be the cause of our not so crisp, not so clean lines head on. And in a way, it's like just pulling the tooth straight out. It might hurt a bit at the start, but it's worth it afterwards. It's also easier because a pen does give clean lines. It's actually easier to see and therefore to assess, to work out how we're going, to judge whether we're getting clean lines with accuracy. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. If you're wanting to be able to draw with crisper line work and marks, I hope this has been helpful. This has certainly been a focus for me of late, and I hope that you can see from these thoughts the same sort of improvement that I feel like I've been seeing in my work. But in the end, whatever marks and lines you're trying for, in whatever materials you like to use, and whatever your drawing style is, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next video. Bye.